Sigmund Freud explored psychology on a vast scale. He is known as the father of psychoanalysis, and his encounters with the conscious and unconscious have helped promote understanding of the human psyche and the reasons of human behavior. He exchanged his experiences and ideas to gain knowledge of what is hidden in the deep enigma of the human mind. Sigmund Freud was born Sigismund Shlomo Freud on May 6, 1856, in Freiburg, Moravia, part of what is now the Czech Republic. His father, Jacob Freud, was a textile merchant, and his mother, Amalia, was Jacob's third wife. Sigmund was her first of 8 children, although his father had 2 sons who were 20 or so years older. Sigmund was always his mother's favorite child, who referred to him as "my golden Siggy." He later attributed some of his success to his mother's support and confidence in her son. The Freud family had a Jewish background, but Jacob Freud was a freethinker, and Sigmund would later become an atheist. Even so, this family heritage would come back to affect Sigmund in his career and later life. When Sigmund was 4, the family moved to Vienna, Austria, the city where Freud would live and work until his death. Details about his early life are largely mysterious, as twice later in life he would destroy his personal papers. He was taught at home until he entered the Sperling Gymnasium and graduated first in his class. Obviously, he was extremely academic-minded, and he liked to think of himself as primarily a scientist. He enrolled into the University of Vienna in 1873, and studied medicine there, at first focusing on biology but later switching to neurology. A year after receiving his degree in 1881, he became engaged to a Martha Bernays, and at this time he got a job as a doctor at the Vienna General Hospital. But after his marriage in 1886, he started his own private practice to treat psychological disorders. It was while at the university that Freud had begun to closely associate with a colleague and mentor, Dr. Joseph Breuer. Breuer was 14 years older than Freud, and he became a fatherly figure to the young doctor. It was while working with Dr. Breuer that Freud would have a turning point in his life and career. This was the case of Anna O., actually a woman named Bertha Pappenheim. She suffered from a severe mental and emotional condition then known as hysteria, in which a patient experienced unpleasant physical conditions, like blindness or paralysis, without any physical explanation. A variety of experts were called in to examine her, but since there was no physical sickness, she could not be diagnosed with anything. She became a patient of Dr. Breuer's in 1880, and he realized that she had hysteria. After working with her, Breuer noticed that occasionally she would slip into unconscious states, as if under hypnosis. She called these states the clouds. While she was in these states, she could talk with Breuer, and while conversing with her, Breuer found out about various experiences that she had undergone. Many were traumatic, but others seemed insignificant. Breuer and Freud then realized that through talking with their psychological patients about past experiences that had influenced them, they could cure some of their symptoms. However, they thought that the patient had to be in a hypnotic state, and this influenced Freud to travel to Paris in 1885 to study under acclaimed neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, who dealt with his patients through hypnosis. Freud spent about a year in Paris. He became fascinated with Charcot's method of hypnosis, and when he returned home, he set up his own private practice. However, he eventually discovered that the effects of using hypnosis as a cure were not long-lasting, and therefore he required another way to cure his patients. He started to treat his patients in a new way. Instead of revealing the experiences that had affected them through conversation while under hypnosis, Freud decided to talk to the patients while they were conscious and aware of their surroundings. He encouraged them to talk uninhibitedly about anything that came to their mind, and he would analyze what they had said to get to the bottom of what was ailing them. Before long, the treatment was seen to work, and in 1895, Breuer and Freud gained recognition for their book, Studies in Hysteria. At this point, Freud was beginning to prepare his theory of the human mind. Shortly after this publication, Breuer and Freud parted ways. Freud then began to focus on his own theories of the human mind, and in 1900, after an intense period of self-analysis following the death of his father, the interpretation of dreams was published. Although today it is seen as Freud's most important work, at the time it went relatively unnoticed. In this book, Freud told the story of the unconscious and the conscious mind. According to Freud, the mind is like an iceberg. The visible part above the water is the conscious mind. However, beneath the water lies a much larger part of the iceberg, and in the mind, this is the unconscious. Although the conscious part of the mind is constantly trying to repress the unconscious, from time to time the conscious cannot do this. Probably the time when this is most apparent is while sleeping. Freud said that since we cannot control our dreams, they represent our desires, innermost thoughts, and what we could not understand while in a conscious state. So dreams could also reveal the problems behind a mental disorder, and Freud used his patients' dreams to analyze the way that their mind worked. These methods of treating his patients became the foundations of psychoanalysis. In 1901, Freud published another book. In the Psychopathology of Everyday Life, Freud introduced what we now call Freudian slips. These are instances in everyday life when a person makes an unconscious mistake in what they say, do, or how they act. Freud argued that although these instances seem insignificant, they are actually a gateway to the unconscious, which has slipped through the conscious mind and makes its appearance on the surface. A Freudian slip is now an everyday term for these occurrences. Freud wrote various other books and essays around this time, and in 1902 he gained the position of associate professor at the University of Vienna. In 1908 he established the Psychoanalytic Society that was composed of his followers. Among these who subscribed to his theories were C.G. Jung and Alfred Adler. In 1909, Freud's fame and reputation increased dramatically when he gave a series of lectures in the United States. His influence was becoming more and more apparent worldwide. The 1916 publication of 5 lectures on psychoanalysis saw Freud become a household name. His fame would only continue to grow until the end of his life. In 1923, Freud outlined his conception of the mind in the ego and the id, which refer to 2 parts of the mind. It was also in this year when he was diagnosed with jaw cancer due to the fact that he was a heavy smoker. Over the next 16 years, Freud had 30 operations done to treat the disease. As the Nazi shadow began to spread across Europe, Freud became a target because of his Jewish heritage. In 1938, when the Germans annexed Austria in the Anschluss, Freud was arrested. His passport was confiscated, the meeting places of the Psychoanalytic Society were searched along with his home and personal things, and his daughter Anna was interrogated. Eventually, however, due to his fame, popularity, and influence, President Roosevelt and Italian dictator Benito Mussolini negotiated for Freud's release. The Germans complied, and Freud and his wife Martha escaped to England. In 1939, just a year later while in exile, Freud died of cancer. Although he remains a very controversial figure, there is no doubt about the legacy he left behind. His exploration of the human mind resulted in his status as the father of psychoanalysis, and in his accomplishment of being the very first person to delve that deep into the way the mind works. His encounter of mental diseases in his patients allowed him to create theories which are still in use today, and to exchange his findings for greater insight into the great mystery of what really goes on inside our heads.